Hi, my name is Avery Young, and I'm a lactation consultant in Atlanta, Georgia. And today I want to talk to you for just a little bit about some strategies and positioning tips to help you latch your newborn. And when I say newborn, what I really mean is infants from birth to about 8 weeks. And the reason why I wanted to talk about infants from birth to 8 weeks today is because latching them is a little bit easier than latching older babies. And the reason for that is because babies are purely reflexive when they're really young. And what that means is that they're driven by their brain, by choices that they don't have the ability to make choices to say thank you, no thank you. They're purely reflexive beings. And so they're responding specifically to stimulus that may be given. And so when they're little, it's much easier to shape their latching behaviors because it's really just about understanding what those infant reflexes are and then understanding how to use those infant reflexes to help them feed a little bit more. So when we talk about infant feeding, I want you to understand that there's two kind of things that go on. There's the latching process, which is how we bring them to your breast or chest, and that really sets the stage for success. And then there's what happens after they latch. So what they do with that milk when they take it and how they swallow it, that's a story of how their oral motor skills are able to transfer milk to swallow, or their story of oral function. So today I want to talk specifically about latching and positioning, because if you aren't latching and positioning your baby in a way that sets them up for success, then you're already going to have some oral function challenges because they aren't able to swallow in the most efficient and effective way. And if you understand what your infant's feeding reflexes are supposed to be doing, then you can help engage those reflexes to help make your infant a little bit more, have a better, more active role in the feeding process. And that will help everybody. So to understand a little bit about positioning, let's first understand what position your infant, your all babies, but your newborn really feeds best in. And infants can swallow and feed best when their head is in gentle extension. So if your head and neck is at a 90-degree angle here, then you can actually feed better when your head is in about a 100-degree angle. So slightly above this neutral position. And to test that out, you can just do it yourself. So if you put your head down here and close your head and try to open your mouth really widely and try to swallow and try to stick your tongue forward, because those are the three things that your infant needs to be able to do to feed with ease. They need to be able to swallow, they need to be able to open really wide before they latch, and they need to be able to hold their tongue forward to stabilize the breast. So if you put your head here and do those things, you'll find that it's very hard. And if you put your head here in a neutral position, you'll find that it's a little bit easier. But if you put your head here in this open position where you're about 10 degrees above neutral, in the same place you would be holding it if you were drinking a drink, some coffee or tea, you'll find that you can gape easier, you can swallow better, and it's much easier to hold your tongue out for an extended period of time. So what is biologically normal for feeding is to feed in this gentle extended position. That doesn't mean you need to feed with your head super far back. So we don't want to have an extreme one way or the other with your infant. We don't want them, they wouldn't be comfortable, or feeding wouldn't feel easy if they were feeding with their head in extreme extension. But in this gentle extension, that's when feeding is the best. And the thing is that infants have the reflexes to be able to feed like that already built into their brain. So if you were to bring a newborn to your breast and you were to slide them on your breast lower than you think you're supposed to, and when I say lower, what I actually mean is not lower this way, but lower this way. So slide them back so that their hip is closer to your hip, so that their head is gently below your nipple, so that when you end up positioning them on your body, their head and their nipple, their chin and their bottom lip is positioned lower than you think. Okay. When you position your infant lower than you think, what they'll do if you give them a chance, and they can, is they'll start by kind of moving their head around to look. And eventually they'll get to the point where they actually look up. So they have a reflex built right in that helps them look up. And what happens when an infant looks up and a newborn looks up is that gets their chin planted. So they look up, and the looking up gets the chin planted. And when the chin gets planted, that triggers a gaping reflex. So the next step is, the first reflex is to look up to get the chin planted. When the chin gets planted, that triggers a gaping reflex. And then when you help your infant forward and that nipple enters their mouth, that triggers the sucking reflex. So the reflexive pattern that the infant needs to go through in order to be able to get that wide gape and that deep latch is to be able to look up, to plant the chin, to gape widely, to come forward, and then they feel the nipple in their mouth, and that's what engages the sucking process. Okay, so it's really helpful to think of these reflexes as sort of different members of a relay, different relay members on a race, right? So each one of these reflexes has its own job, its own lap that it needs to finish. So there's the looking up lap that needs to finish, and then that sets up the pass off. The chin is what sets off the baton passing to the gaping. And the gaping needs to be able to finish its job by opening really wide. And when it does that and the nipple touches the inside of the mouth, that passes the baton off to the sucking reflex to be able to do its job. And then when the sucking reflex does its job, then then the tongue can move the milk back and swallow safely. So that's the oral function thing, which would be the next set of relay members that come along. But today we're just going to talk about the going up, the gaping, the coming forward, and the sucking. So if your baby's having a hard time, that means that one of those reflexes aren't able to do their job. It's not able to engage in that process. And if you can think about where your infant's falling apart, where it's hard, that tells you that where in those sequence of reflexes is falling apart a little bit. And that's where it can help you figure out how to help. Now, when you have a newborn, a couple things is that I know that newborns are fragile and they're scary because they're so small, and we think that they're completely incapable of feeding, but the truth is that newborns are actually much more competent than we think. Okay, so newborns have these feeding reflexes built in that allow them to be able to feed and allows them to be able to go through the feeding process by themselves. Most people tell me that when they birth their baby and they put them on their chest and they wait and they see their infant pick their head up and look at them, they are shocked and in awe of how strong their infant is because they can lift their head up to latch or lift their head up to look at you right in the eyes, right? It's amazing when your infant does that. And that's because newborns are really born with more capability than we think. I want you to think about that for a second, because no other mammal smushes and shapes their infant or makes any sort of like pancake shape and shoves it into their mouth, right? Think about what happens with primates. So those are kind of our closest mimic, right? And if you watch a primate at a zoo, I live near the Atlanta Zoo and I like to go watch the gorillas. That mama gorilla, she just puts her baby right here with one arm. So she slaps her baby right here with one arm, and then she goes trotting off through her habitat, right? With brand new babies. And that baby holds on and is just fine because it's clinging to mom. And they aren't shoving and holding and doing those things. So I think it's important when we have newborns is to give them the credit that is due. Infant mammals are born with the ability to move their body, to latch, to feed. And it's really important that we let them do that because it's the movement process that infant mammals use of moving their head and neck, which teaches their brain how to move their head and neck. And they need those head and neck skills down the road for doing things like tummy time. So when an infant's in tummy time and they lift their head up, right, because this is the position they need to be able to do to be safe in tummy time, that doesn't actually get learned in tummy time. It gets learned in feeding, and then it gets used in tummy time. So we want to make sure that we're giving your infant the ability to go through these reflexive patterns so that they can build the tone that they need for the next things in life. So let's talk about what to do with an infant next. So first off, when you're helping your infant latch, and this is a brand new baby, it's really important to let them practice a little bit. So as a parent, your job is to help your infant as much as they need, but as little as they need at the same time. So if your infant's struggling just a little bit and they're grunting and they're like, oh, this is hard, it's okay for feeding to be a little hard. It's okay for them to practice. And if they get past that, this is hard, and they shift into the I can't, that is when you can help them. And I want you to think about compressing and shaping your breasts. That's helping. And that's helping a lot. So that's kind of a compensation tool for a brand new infant, because if you compress your nipple or your breast and make a sandwich of it and put it into their mouth, then what you're telling the infant is that you're wiring their brain to not open their mouth very wide. Because if they only open this wide and I push my nipple right into their mouth, that's all their brain is going to tell, that's all their brain knows to do over and over again. So what we really want to do is we want to let your infant's reflexive team, that relay race, do its whole job so that it practices opening its mouth really widely. So we want the infant to wire opening and give them the help to come forward. So if you've been shaping your breast, if you were taught to do that, because it's super common, sometimes you might need to shape it. And really, truly, the only times you really need to shape your breast is if your infant cannot latch. So if the suck reflex, if we've gaped and we've opened widely, and then your infant comes forward and they cannot latch onto the nipple, they're bobbing and they don't know what to do. Maybe you've been using a nipple shield or some other strategy. That's when shaping is really helpful, because what shaping does is it makes the nipple harder. So if you push right here on your breast or you pinch right here on your breast, then it makes this nipple part firmer, and that provides more of a sensory input to your infant's mouth if they can't latch. But if they can latch without shaping, then you want them to latch without shaping, because you want them to open their mouth when they're a newborn as widely as they can to latch, because it's the width of the gape that establishes the depth of the latch. Okay. You can't get a truly deep latch if you don't start with a wide gape. And your infant is pre-wired to be able to do that. And if you're playing with a newborn, you haven't been doing this so much that we have conditioned them to not be able to do that. So it just doesn't take a long time to be able to help get that infant to gape. So with a newborn, and if you need to use a pillow, you absolutely can use a pillow to prop your infant up if you want to, so that you can practice first. So practice sliding your infant's butt down lower than you think you're supposed to go. The reason for that is when your infant gets their head back, let's say you start right here where it's lined up with your infant's mouth, where we normally would. If your infant takes their head back and then they open their mouth, they're going to way overshoot your nipple, right? And then when they come over, they're going to clamp down. We don't want your infant to overshoot your nipple when they gape. We want the nipple to be at the top of their mouth, at the end of the gape. So when we slide our infant down and start with them back farther on our body, and we get that chin planted, then when they gape, when they open their mouth, now the nipple is at the top of their mouth. And when we help them forward, it hits their palate, that initiates the suck. When they close their jaw down to stabilize the breast tissue in their mouth, they're not going to stabilize. They're not going to close it down right on your nipple, because they have a lot of breast tissue in their mouth to close it down on. So that makes it easier for them to hold on to, and it makes it less painful for you too. And then when your infant has latched, then you can put your hands behind their head to support them, because your brand new baby can absolutely hold their head up more than you think with latching, but they certainly can't hold it up for an entire feed because they don't have that level of tone yet. So make sure you're putting your hand here on the side of their head, or here, even here on the back of their neck. If you're in a nice reclined position, then you might even just be able to put your hands on the back of their neck to support them when they're latching. And then after they've latched, that's when you can cradle them in your arms and use whatever pillow that you want to put them in your body. So even though your infant is brand new, your infant is still so capable of going through this latching process. And the more you see them do that, the more empowered you can let them be. And we can be a little bit more patient too. So if you feel like you have been frantic and in a hurry to get your infant to latch because, like, oh my goodness, this is my fault, I got to do this, I'm helping you, I'm on it. Take a step back for a second and say, actually, you're the one that's capable in here. And my job as a feeding parent is to get you in a position that lets your reflexes get set up so that you can go through the reflexive process to feed. And it doesn't mean it always works beautifully. Sometimes our infant is hangry when they come to the breast, and that makes it super hard. Or sometimes they're super stressed, right? Or tense. And if your infant's really tense, then guess what? If you come to the breast like this, really tense, then that first step is going to be really hard, because getting into looking up, getting into extension means we have to have some level of relaxation of the head and neck, right? And if we can't, then getting into extension is hard. And if getting into extension is hard, then getting the gaping reflex is going to be hard. And if getting the gaping reflex is going to be hard, then getting a deep latch is going to be hard. And then they might chew your nipple in your mouth. Okay. So all these reflexes really do matter in terms of their order of operation and being able to finish their lap. Your baby's brain is so smart that it doesn't need those reflexes to finish their lap in order to be able to get the calories to survive, because brains are resilient and adaptable and they can skip them. Your brain will say, oh, these 2 laps didn't work, so we're going to go right to sucking. And that can work in terms of being able to suck. but it isn't the most efficient or effective way to feed. And there's going to be a cost associated with that. There's going to be a cost because it may be sore for you. There may be a cost because it causes nipple damage. And there's a cost because it's harder for your infant. So it may mean that your infant is spending more calories to feed or more work to feed than they otherwise would. And if your infant is spending a lot of energy to feed, then they're draining their energy supply really quickly during feeding, and they're going to drain their energy supply before they have time to fill up their gas tank, right? So then your infant may fall asleep before their belly is as full as it could be. And that can start to get into things like cluster feeding. So if you notice that your infant is cluster feeding all the time, your baby, that's a good indication that there may be something that could be improved with latching that might help your infant transfer a little bit better. Or you may want to pay attention to oral function, because there might be something with oral function too that might be worth looking at if feeding is harder for your infant than it should be. Human feeding, mammalian feeding at the breast or chest isn't biologically designed to be hard. That would be a really bad strategy for feeding animals if it took all this energy and work and calories to feed. So it isn't biologically designed to be hard. It's taking care of an infant is hard, right? Being an infant is growth and all those things are hard, but feeding isn't supposed to be. So if feeding looks like it's difficult for your infant, if your infant's feeding patterns are telling you that something is harder than it is supposed to be, then definitely pay attention to that. Step back and ask why, because feeding is not supposed to be hard. So when you're helping your infant, make sure that you're sliding them back down here, letting them have a chance. Just pause. The first step here is to just give them a chance. Give them a chance to get into extension. When you see them, just look for it. And that's the funnest thing to do as a parent, is to see how capable they are and know what you're looking for, and then pay attention. Do I see them get into extension? Do I see them look up? Yes, great. When they look up, does that cue the gaping reflex? Can they open their mouth wide through the widest range of motion? And then am I helping them forward to the breast when their mouth is at the widest point? So those are the things to pay attention to when you're feeding. And if the answer to all of those things are true, then when your baby has latched, after they've latched, what you should see is the chin planted, the nose nice and free, and you should see a lot of areola above their mouth and not below it, because the nipple is supposed to be at the top of the mouth. So if the nipple is at the top of the mouth, the nipple is at the ceiling, then it's just under the mouth, and that means the areola above the nipple should be showing, okay? So with your newborns, you can experiment. It doesn't matter which position you use. If you use cross cradle or sideline or laying back or all of those things, all of those positions can be really helpful for any baby, but all of them need to start with the chin plant and the gape to set you up for success. My experience is that the best one to practice with when you're learning this is cross cradle. And that means using this arm across your body on your infant's head so that you can have this hand free if you need to. Now, if you are inclined to grab your breast and shove it in your baby's mouth, then take your hand away and instead just lift your nipple up just a little bit. You don't need to hold your breast. You likely don't need to shape your breast, and you probably don't need to shove your breast in your baby's mouth either. You want to help your baby onto your breast and not your breast into your baby's mouth. Okay, so go practice these new things. Let your baby experiment with gaping. Let your baby experiment with extension. Let your baby have the freedom to move their head when latching. And if they slide down too low on your body, if they slide like this, then you can use your hand to support them this way. Okay, so go practice and see if you can let your infant use their reflexes to make feeding just a little bit easier for both of you. And if you get stuck, I'm happy to help. I also do latch lessons live, group courses if you need help with latching, and we can talk you through it to make sure that you understand how to help your infant feed and feel better so that feeding is working out better for everyone. Thanks for joining.